Hey, greetings from the Pacific Northwest, Bo here. This is my third try at this. My friend Desmond asked me to show my 73 Topps football set. These take a long time, so I'm just going to try to fly through it. If there's something to mention out that's interesting, I will. These are league leader cards. You know, most of these guys were not all that great. Bob Trumpy was later a pretty good announcer for NBC, called a lot of Orange Bowls with Don Criqui. But we're just going to try to fly through these because my previous attempts were taking too long, and then I've had some issues with my cats. There's Terry Bradshaw's third-year card. The thing about there's 528 cards in this set. Al Callings, we know what he's famous for. There's 528 cards in this set. There's a few that have got some really interesting names too. I'll try to point them out as we go through. And if there's something interesting to say about somebody like George Blanda, I think he played till he was 48 or 49. Some people think Tom Brady played a long time. Got nothing on George Blanda. And we'll just go through. MacArthur Lane put up some good years. Alan Page, Hall of Famer, was later a judge. Randy Vittelhoff was a big star at Stanford. Kenny Anderson, borderline Hall of Fame stats. That is Grant Hill's dad, believe it or not. Grant Hill of the NBA fame. And Deacon Jones, this Chargers, they tried to put together a team with using a bunch of guys at the end of their career, like Deacon Jones, Johnny Unitas, John Mackey, Roy Gerella. Gerella's Gorillas was his thing, his fan club in Pittsburgh. Bill Curry was later a college football coach. John Brody, also later an announcer, worked a lot with Kurt Gowdy. Also was a very good golfer, was on the PGA Senior Tour. So he had that going for him as well. Mercury Morris, 1,000-yard rusher, did time in federal prison for cocaine. Gene Upshaw's in the Hall of Fame. Just going to try to go through these without taking too much time, especially if it's not. Lydell Mitchell was a great receiver out of the backfield to help those Colts win back-to-back championships of the AFC East, that is, 75, 76, 77. Fran Tarkenton was the NFL's all-time leading passer, great scrambler, lost 3 Super Bowls. Tom Dempsey, no right hand, half a foot, but he kicked for decades, he was the record for the longest field goal, 63 yards, since broken, but held that record for a long time. Bambi played with the Chargers in the NFL. This is him winding down his career with the Cowboys. He won a Super Bowl with the Cowboys, but he was the AFL's all-time leading receiver with the Chargers. They called him Bambi. Lance Allworth. There, Robertson was a pretty fair. You know, this famous footage of Earl Campbell when he was a Ram still, running through him at the goal line. Famous footage of Earl Campbell running him over. An unmarked checklist for me, wow, because you know my cards are like really rough. I played with these as a kid, so Paul Robinson, the end of his career, put up some good years with the Bengals. Manny Fernandez, pretty famous for wrestling alligators, hunting alligators in a swamp with his bare hands, I think. Art Shell was later a coach and a Hall of Famer. Cockcroft, Red Right 88 is all because he couldn't kick football straight. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. Continue just flying through some of these guys. Some of these guys I don't know much, if anything, about. I mean, John Gilliam I know about, but he's not worth talking about. Franco Harris, the Immaculate Deception. Again, no. Immaculate Reception? No. Immaculate Deception. If you know, you know. Karl Mock later was an Oiler and helped the Oilers in 78 79 get to the AFC Championship game. Open up some big holes for Earl Campbell. Earl Campbell was a beast. You know, a lot of these kickers, like Jim Bakken, they were still straight-on kickers. Pat Fisher's a Hall of Famer. Larry Zonka, beast mode before beast mode. You know, I'm a big Seahawk fan. I love beast mode, but Zonka was a brute in the backfield, I'm telling you guys. Emmett Thomas, I believe he's in the Hall of Fame. Rayfield Wright might be in the Hall of Fame. Norm Buelosh, I didn't even know he played for the Eagles. I remember him for the Colts. I don't remember him being an Eagle. See, it was one of those names, Speedy Thomas, that just kind of stand out. Look at that Jack Ham rookie card. That is in terrible condition. But that's what happens when you play with stuff. Not Errol Flynn, Errol Mann. They got rid of Blanda the year they won the Super Bowl, and they kept him as their kicker, and he was awful. They replaced him eventually, I think, with Fred Steinfurt, I think. George Coons, he was later traded to the Colts and helped them improved that offensive line, helped Burt Jones out. I was a big Colt fan in the late 70s. I mean, the Seahawks were my team, don't get me wrong, but Burt Jones is my favorite player. Oh, there's the Manning brothers, Daddy. If he'd been on a good team, he'd been the greatest of all the Mannings. I do believe so. So if you ever get a chance, this guy here, Rich Tombstone Jackson, there's a NFL film thing on YouTube about him. Just look it up. Just look it up. And Lyle Alzado tells a great story about Rich Tombstone Jackson. It is well worth your time. I guarantee you. Wow, Captain Comeback that was a huge comeback. They were down multiple scores with like 2 or 3 minutes to go. The Cowboys were the 49ers, and he rallied them. There's the Immaculate Deception game. That game was a blowout. This is funny. It shows Bob Greasy playing against the Browns. I don't remember him playing in that game. I'm pretty sure it was Earl Morrall. And then that was not a good game either. The Steelers were winning the AFC Championship game at halftime. I think that's when Bob Greasy finally played. I don't think Bob Greasy played in that game against the Browns. I just think that's a photo they just used. And there's the Super Bowl. Not as close as the score. Thanks to Garo Yepremian trying to throw a touchdown pass off a blocked field goal. The field goal would have made it 17-0, but he decides, hey, so Dave Hampton, interesting about him, would have been the first 1,000-yard rusher in Falcons history. He ran the ball, got 1,000 yards exactly. They gave it to him one more time on the last play of the game, of the last game of the year. Lost 2 yards, and he went under 1,000 yards. True story. Lost out on a bonus because of that. So we all know Kevin Bacon, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. They do the same thing with Coy Bacon because he played for so long in so many different teams. So there's the 6 degrees of Coy Bacon. I'll pick this up. Good blocking back there. Bubba Smith from the Police Academy movies. So he was an actor. I'm going through these quick as I can. L.C. Greenwood was damn good on that steel curtain. Curly Culp was good. He was also with the Oilers for a while. Ken Riley, if he's not in the Hall of Fame, he should be. He was damn good. Let's continue to fly through these. Don Maynard. He was, when he retired, he was the NFL's all-time leading receiver for a short time. There was always a guy, somebody when they retired, they were the all-time leading receiver for a while, and then somebody would break it within a year or two. Gene Hickerson, he's in the Hall of Fame. A lot of premature baldness. A lot of guys, a lot of 70s style haircuts here too, the mutton chops and the Fu Manchus and the bushy hair, you know, all that stuff. See, there's some premature thinning, big old curly wad of hair. There's some more balding. You gotta let Tommy, I am much on Casanova. Me and Romeo ain't never been friends. Claude Humphrey's in the Hall of Fame. Chip Glass. See, there's another one of those great names that you're going to find in this set. John Leipold later kicked with the Seattle Seahawks. He was a straight-on kicker. Most of the kickers in the game were still straight-ahead kickers. Willie Brown. Old man Willie, he's going all the way. Is the old call from the Raiders. Bill King. Lots of Raiders radio network called it. Carl Eller, Hall of Famer, later played with the Seahawks. Nick Bonacani was later a co-host with Len Dawson of Inside the NFL on HBO. John Hadle put up a lot of good stats with the Chargers. And some of these guys were decent players. John McMakin threw the biggest block in, or the biggest clip in NFL history, according to Phil Villapiano, during said Immaculate Deception. Laurie Brown put up some good numbers. But, you know, I'm just trying to fly through this a bit, so I'm kind of... Stan Pastorini helped the Oilers get to those back-to-back AFC Championship games in the late 70s. Harold Jackson was the 1970s all-time leading receiver. Mike Phipps, high draft pick, highly thought of out of Purdue, never did produce the way people thought he would. Had a couple of good years with the Bears later, I think. Okay, there's Phil Villapiano. And so for a number of years, I worked grocery. And so I worked for a man named Al Hunter. Al Hunter had played at Notre Dame, was a star there. It was the first 1,000-yard rusher in Notre Dame history. Partly that into a 5-year career with the Seahawks. He told me a story about in the Kingdome. The Seahawks were the first team to beat the Raiders back-to-back, and they did it 2 straight years. 78, 79. And one of those games at the Kingdome, they were blowing the Raiders out, and the Raiders were still really good then. And he clipped Villapiano really bad near the end of the game. And Villapiano followed him around for like the last minute of the game, trying to get even, and couldn't do it. And they never played against each other again. So it may have been in 79, because then he went to the Bills, and Al May never played him again. Anyhow, 78 or 79. And Villapiano said, "I'm going to get even with you." 15 years later, Al says, "I'm sitting in a casino in Vegas playing blackjack, and this big hand comes down on my shoulder. I look up, and it's Phil Villapiano. And he says, 'I bet you thought I forgot about you.'" They both laughed, and Villapiano went to the bar and bought him some drinks. Great story. Phil Villapiano tells some great stories on those NFL films things. Charlie Taylor was the league's all-time leading receiver at one time too. Another one of those guys that broke the record. I think Don Maynard's record. In fact, records didn't last long. Then Steve Largent had it, and then Jerry Rice, I think, took it, and who knows who's got it now. I don't pay attention to that. Sean Riggins, before he went to the Redskins and before he had the Mohawk, Mike Wagner from that Steel Curtain defense. Chris Hamburger, I believe he's in the Hall of Fame. Start trying to pick this up here a little bit. Trying to just shoot this best I can. A long way to go yet, sorry. This is going to be a long video. These are just long. John Frenchie Fuqua of the Immaculate Deception fame. These boyhood photo cards are stupid. I think, and here's the thing, everybody else got a regular issue card. This is the only Roman Gabriel, I think, even in the set, is that boyhood photo one. And I just don't like it. I like Roman Gabriel. He was a pretty good quarterback. Oops. Canted the camera a little bit funny. So this next card, Bobby Douglas. At one time, he held the NFL's rushing record for quarterbacks. It was like 926 yards, something like that. Mike Vick later broke it. There's the Bullet, Bob Hayes. Fastest man alive at one time. Thunderfoot Weaver. He later punted for the Seahawks. Mean Joe Green. How mean was he? He was so mean that blah, blah, blah. We all know he did. John Senrad is the first just full-time kicker who made the Hall of Fame. But we all know Mean Joe Green, not so mean. Kid gave him a Coke, he gave him a jersey. Now this man was mean. The assassin, Jack Tatum. Floyd Little later had a bunch of car dealerships, and I think, including one in Seattle or Tacoma, I think. Tommy Hart, part of that great Gold Rush defense, that late 70s 49ers defense. They were good. Bob Greasy, son Brian, played in the NFL, Hall of Famer. I always liked Mel Gray. Put up some good years with Jim Hart's on the football and the Big Red Machine. The Cardinals, the Cincinnati Reds were the Big Red Machine. Football had the St. Louis Cardinals, the Big Red Machine. That's right, kids, the St. Louis Cardinals. And before St. Louis, they'd been the Chicago Cardinals. That was before my time, though. Dick Butkus, I believe that's his last card, and he later was an actor, too. Was in My Two Dads, I do believe. I think he played the guy that owned the restaurant underneath. See, there's one of those great names, Happy Feller. Randy Shanklin. Jerry Smith, there's a documentary about him. He turned out he was, led a double life. He was homosexual, and, he had to cover it up because he was a pro football player. So they did a documentary about that not that long ago. There's Lyle Alzado. Tells a great story about Rich Tombstone Jackson. Check it out on YouTube. You can find it. NFL Films, Rich Jackson. And just watch it. It's only about 5 minutes long. Jim Kick, Butch and Sundance, right? Him and Zonka, Butch and Sundance. Back then, Topps didn't have the license to do football cards. Nobody did. So the logos all got airbrushed off, but you can kind of see a little bit of the logo on Jim Kick's helmet. Freddie Bolitnikoff used a lot of Stickum, smoked a lot of cigarettes. Dan Dierdorf, he's a Hall of Famer. Rich Castor put up some good numbers catching the ball from Joe Willie Namath. So there's a Carl Garrett. Jim Turner, straight ahead kicker. Len Dawson was a new sports reporter, and he did inside the NFL. Nick Monicani. Bob Chandler put up good years with the Raiders too. Tom Matte once had to play emergency quarterback in a playoff game. Larry Stallings was a good coach later. Double O, Ken Burrow. Jim Plunkett. Good years with the Raiders, not so good years with the Patriots or the 49ers. Charlie Smith, that's from the Heidi game. He caught the go-ahead score. Raiders scored twice in the last. You know, the thing about the Heidi game that's kind of crap, they say, oh, nobody saw it. Nobody saw it. The NBC took it off the air. Only if you lived east of Denver. And everybody west of Denver. Because I was a little kid when that happened. And I remember asking my dad, well, what about the Heidi game? My dad had no idea what the hell I was talking about. It's because the game stayed on the air out here in the state of Washington. It didn't go off the air. It didn't interrupt it for Heidi. He saw the conclusion of the game. Because we didn't have the Seahawks yet. We were Raider fans. So in '76, I went to a Seahawk game. They beat the Falcons, and Scott Hunter was the Falcons quarterback. I don't remember if Barkowski was hurt or was just ineffective when he played. Lem Barney's in the Hall of Fame. They called him the Ghost. Gary Garrison. Ed Podolak, huge game in the '71 playoffs against the Dolphins. I mean, monster game. One of the greatest single game performances of all time, Ed Podolak. Jim O'Brien hit the game-winning field goal in Super Bowl 5 for the Colts over the Cowboys. Leroy Kelly replaced Jim Brown, put up good numbers. So one of my best friends in high school, Jack Crater, his dad, Gene Crater, who is, unfortunately, he's terminally ill. He's in hospice. So if you're watching, much love to you guys. But anyhow, so his dad, Gene, was teammates in high school with Ray Mansfield. Tommy Nobis, that guy should be in the Hall of Fame. Tommy Nobis was an outstanding player. Fred Dreyer was TV's Hunter. If you know, you know. Yeah, I know I skipped over Jake Scott. Sorry. Jake Scott was pretty good. Charlie Sanders was good too. You know, but you can only say so much. At some point in time, you got to just get through this because nobody's going to watch this from start to finish. You know, no matter how interesting you try to make it. Joe Willie Namath, Broadway Joe. Tim Rossovich was later an actor. He was always like a heavy, like, so if it was a TV show and there were mobsters in it, he was like one of the hitman or the driver, you know. That was always what Tim Rossovich seemed to do. Jim Marshall, he's running the wrong way. He should be in the Hall of Fame. He's undersized on that Purple People Eater defense. Willie Lanier is a Hall of Famer. I think it was the first African-American black starting middle linebacker in the AFL and the NFL, of course. There's Earl Morrall. Kenny Houston's in the Hall of Fame. That's if you remember J.T. Snow that used to play first base for the California Angels, that's his dad. Mike Reed later quit football because he was a writer. He was a pianist and a country music writer, but he was also a concert pianist. He only played like 4 or 5 years. He could have been in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, that kind. Walt Garrison, he used to do those commercials for Snuff. It wasn't Copenhagen. Can't remember who it was. It was the wintergreen stuff. You put a little pinch between your cheek and gum. That's what he used to say. Just can't remember what brand it was. Doesn't matter. Probably get banned for mentioning that. There's Fair Hooker. That's another one of those great names, right? Chip Glass, Happy Feller, Fair Hooker. They all have cards in this set. That's what's kind of interesting about this 73 set. The Stork, he's a Hall of Famer. Mike Garrett had really good years with the Kansas City Chiefs. Fred Cox, he invented the Nerf ball, believe it or not. Bobby Bell, Hall of Famer, outstanding player. I think we're getting towards the end here finally, guys. Sorry. Larry Little's a Hall of Famer. I know I skipped over players. Sorry, guys. Ain't one of you watched this from start to finish, though. Not one of you. And if you say you did, you're probably not telling the truth. Bob Lilly's in the Hall of Fame. See, there's the aforementioned Johnny U. Johnny Unitas finishing out his career with the Chargers. Roger Worley was very good. So was Jerry Shirk. Gene Washington was very good. Was later the president of the Players Association. Jim Otto's a Hall of Famer. But you see, these cards are not in great shape. Like I said, I used to play with them. Gary Apremian threw the worst pass in Super Bowl VII. I think it was actually ruled a fumble. Returned for a touchdown. Mike Bass returned it for a touchdown. Says 17-0, made it 14-7. Almost made a game out of it, but that Dolphin defense, too much lunch for the Redskins. Charlie Joyner, at one time, he was the NFL's all-time leading receiver. I think he broke it right before Steve Largent did. Marty Domrus. John Brockington put up some big years with the Packers and couldn't duplicate him anywhere else. Got traded around after that. Captain Comeback. Boy, that card is in bad shape too. Wow. Captain Late, Captain Comeback. Is that second year? I think that's second year Staubach. Whee. That's rough. Must have been all those comebacks. Oh, later an actor, was on Little House on the Prairie. Also an announcer, teamed with Dick Enberg. The great Merlin Olsen. It was a fearsome foursome. Andy Russell was a great linebacker on the Steel Curtain. Steve Spurrier was later a big-time college football coach. He was also a punter in the NFL, too. People don't realize he was a pretty decent punter as well. The Snake, Kenny Stabler out of Alabama. Hall of Famer. A lot of people think he doesn't deserve to be because he threw too many interceptions. But I'm telling you, Kenny Stabler was clutch. Some of the biggest moments in pro football, Kenny Stabler and the Raiders were involved in. Craig Morton, the interesting thing about him, he quarterbacked the Cowboys to a Super Bowl they lost. He was the backup to Roger Staubach when they won. And then he later went to Denver, got Denver to Super Bowl 12, where they played the Cowboys and got massacred. Also, I remember a game against the Seahawks in 78 or 79. The Seahawks led 35-10 with about 5 minutes to go in the third quarter, and he came off the bench. Final score was Denver 38, Seattle 35. I was like, how the hell did that happen? Steve Owens, I think he won a Heisman Trophy at Oklahoma, maybe? Might be his biggest. Buck Buchanan, outstanding football player. There's the Juice. We all know what he did. Billy Kilmer, underrated, tough guy. Threw a real wobbly ball, but he was a leader, man. He was a tough dude. Tough guy. Helped those Redskins to a lot of playoff games, filling in at the end of Sonny Jurgensen's career. Coming off the bench or starting because Jurgensen was hurt. Paul Warfield's in the Hall of Fame. And, we're almost to the end. Jackie Smith, he's got to be the sickest man in America, Norm Snead. Led the NFC in passing that year. That's so weird to me. Reggie Mother Rucka. Raymond Chester, big years with the Raiders, had bigger years with the Colts, and came back to the Raiders, had more big years. Why he's in the Hall of Fame, why he's not in the Hall of Fame, I don't know. Because he put up some great years. Dennis Shaw was kind of a, could have been, what might have been, could have been story. There you have it. The 1973 Topps football set.